There's a guy at my gym. Pause. I've been seeing him for about 3 years. Same time every morning, 6:15, like clockwork. He parks in the back corner of the lot, always the same spot. Drives a 2012 Honda Civic with faded paint and a dent on the passenger side that he clearly has no intention of fixing. He wears this same rotation of maybe 4 or 5 t-shirts. Generic sneakers. The kind of watch you get at Target for $30. Nothing about this man signals anything other than ordinary, working class, getting by. I made assumptions about him. I'm not proud of that, but I did. We all do. You see the car, you see the clothes, you build a story in your head. And the story I built was, nice guy, probably works a trade job, probably doing okay, but nothing special. Probably worries about money the way most people worry about money. Pause. About 6 months ago, I ended up next to him at the coffee counter after a workout. We got to talking. Small talk turned into real talk the way it sometimes does when two people are tired and caffeinated and don't have anywhere to be for 20 minutes. His name is Glen. He's 53. He's a retired electrical engineer. Retired. At 53. Pause. Glen has $4.2 million in index funds. His house, a 3-bedroom in a neighborhood your GPS would describe as residential, is paid off. His 2 kids' college funds are fully funded. He volunteers 3 days a week at a community center teaching basic electrical work to teenagers. He drives the 2012 Civic because, and this is almost exactly what he said, in the same tone you'd use to explain why you prefer a certain brand of peanut butter. It starts every morning and it gets me where I need to go. I don't understand what else a car is supposed to do. Laugh softly. I stood there with my coffee and I felt something I've felt before. That specific mix of admiration and embarrassment that comes from realizing you've been playing a game that someone else figured out was rigged a long time ago. Because I looked at Glen every morning for 3 years and thought I knew his story. I didn't know anything. Pause. Let me ask you something, and sit with it for a second before you answer. If Glen pulled into the parking lot tomorrow in a brand new BMW, would you think more of him or less of him? Be honest. Don't give me the answer you think you're supposed to give. Give me the real one. Most people, and I include myself in this, most people would think more of him. We'd notice the car. We'd update the story. We'd think, oh, he's doing well. Something changed. Good for him. But nothing would have actually changed. He'd have the same net worth minus $60,000. He'd have the same life minus a monthly payment. He'd have the same freedom minus the maintenance and insurance, and the attention of every car thief in the parking lot. The BMW would subtract from his life in every measurable way, but it would add to your perception of his life. And we've built an entire economy around that gap between what things actually do for you and what they make other people think about you. Pause. I've been thinking about Glen a lot since that conversation. Not just because of the money though. $4.2 million at 53 is the kind of number that makes you re-examine your choices. But because of what he represents, Glen is invisible. And his invisibility is the most expensive thing he owns. More valuable than the index funds. More valuable than the paid-off house. Because his invisibility is what made all of it possible. Pause. Here's what I mean. I started looking into the research after meeting Glen because I wanted to know, is he an anomaly or is this a pattern? It's a pattern, a massive one. Thomas Stanley and William Danko spent decades studying millionaires across America. They wrote a book about it, The Millionaire Next Door, and their findings shattered basically every assumption I had about what wealthy people look like. 80% of millionaires are first generation. They didn't inherit the money, they built it. Half of them have lived in the same house for more than 20 years. They're more likely to drive a Ford than a Ferrari. And here's the finding that stopped me cold. Millionaires were disproportionately clustered in middle-class and blue-collar neighborhoods. Not the affluent zip codes, not the gated communities, the regular neighborhoods, The places with Honda Civics in the driveway and notice boards in the lobby. The researchers were surprised too. They expected the opposite. The explanation is the simplest and most uncomfortable truth in personal finance. The people who look wealthy are spending their money on looking wealthy. The people who are wealthy are spending their money on being wealthy. And those are two completely different activities. Pause. Let me tell you a story about someone on the other side of this equation, because I think the contrast is where the lesson lives. I had a colleague a few years back, I'll call him Derek, similar age to Glen, maybe a little younger, senior position at a well-known firm, made about $220,000 a year, which in Chicago puts you in rarefied air. Derek drove a leased Mercedes E-Class, $780 a month. He wore watches that cost more than some people's rent. His suits were tailored. His shoes were Italian. His LinkedIn profile photo looked like it belonged in a magazine. Every conference, every client, dinner, every industry event, Derek showed up looking like wealth incarnate. And people treated him accordingly. They assumed he was crushing it. They assumed the external matched the internal. Pause. I found out later, again, the way you find out about most people's finances, through a crack in the performance that you weren't supposed to see, that Derek's net worth at age 48 was approximately $140,000. Let me put that in perspective. Glen, $4.2 million. Faded Honda Civic, t-shirts from Target. Derek, $140,000. Leased Mercedes, Italian shoes. Same country, similar careers. Similar earning power over their lifetimes. A 30-fold difference in net worth. Pause. And I don't tell you Derek's story to humiliate him. I tell it because I was closer to Derek than I was to Glen for most of my adult life. I understood Derek's choices because they were my choices. The Tag Heuer, the lease, the apartment that cost more than it should because of what it said about me. Every one of those purchases was buying the same thing, the feeling of being perceived as successful. And that feeling, as it turns out, is the most expensive product on the market because you can never buy enough of it. The moment you achieve one level of visible success, you see the next level. And the next level requires a bigger purchase. And that purchase requires more income. And the more income you earn, the more you need to display it to justify earning it. It's a loop, a very expensive, very elegant, very destructive loop. And Glen opted out of it entirely. Pause. Here's something Glen told me that I haven't been able to shake. We were talking about his decision to retire early, and I asked him honestly, genuinely, wasn't it hard? Didn't he feel like he was missing out? Didn't he look at other people's lives, the nice cars, the vacations, the visible markers of success, and feel like he was depriving himself? He thought about it for a second. Then he said something that rearranged something in my head, softer. He said, Marcus, I spent my 30s watching my coworkers buy things to prove they were doing well. And I spent my 40s watching those same coworkers work jobs they hated because they couldn't afford to stop. The things they bought to prove they were free were the exact things that made them trapped. Pause. The things they bought to prove they were free were the exact things that made them trapped. I want you to sit with that, because that sentence contains more financial wisdom than any book I've ever read. Pause. Let me go deeper into why this works, not just the philosophy, but the mechanics. Because there are real, measurable, dollars and cents advantages to being invisible that go way beyond the obvious. First, and this is one nobody talks about, invisible wealth protects you from being a target. I know that sounds dramatic, but the data is real. According to research from Javelin, high net worth individuals with visible wealth are 43% more likely to experience identity theft. Cybercriminals specifically target people who display affluence on social media, through visible purchases, through the neighborhood they live in. When you drive the BMW and wear the watch and live in the zip code, you're advertising. Not to your friends, to everyone, including people whose job it is to find people exactly like you. Glen's 2012 Civic is a security system. Nobody looks at that car and thinks, I should find out what this guy has. Nobody scrapes his social media for financial information. Nobody targets him because there's nothing to target. The visible wealthy person pays for security systems to protect their stuff. The invisible wealthy person doesn't need security systems because nobody knows there's anything to steal. Laughs softly. It's the cheapest insurance policy in the world. And it costs nothing. Pause. Second, and this one hit me personally, invisible wealth protects your relationships. I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but the moment people find out you have money, the dynamics change. Not always in obvious ways. Sometimes it's subtle. The friend who starts mentioning financial problems a little more often. The family member who suddenly has an opportunity they want you to invest in. The colleague who starts treating you differently, not worse, just differently. With a layer of something that wasn't there before. Glen told me he has maybe 6 people in his life who know his actual financial situation. His wife, his financial advisor, his accountant, and 3 friends he's had since college. Everyone else? They see the Civic and the t-shirts and they treat him like a regular guy. Because to them, he is a regular guy, softer. And he told me, and I could hear the gratitude in his voice when he said this, that the friendships he has are real. Completely, uncomplicatedly real. Nobody is friends with Glen because of what he has. They're friends with him because of who he is. He said he watched a wealthy colleague go through a divorce and discovered that half the people in his life were there for the lifestyle, not the person. And Glen said, I never want to wonder that about anyone I love. Pause. Think about that for a second. Think about your own relationships. If your financial situation changed dramatically in either direction, which relationships would survive unchanged? That question keeps me up sometimes. Pause. Third, and this is the one that the math nerds will appreciate. Invisible wealth gives you leverage in every financial interaction you'll ever have. The car. Dealer treats someone in a Honda Civic differently than someone in a Mercedes. Not better or worse differently. The Civic driver gets the real price. The Mercedes driver gets the I can see you appreciate quality price. A contractor driving into a modest neighborhood quotes differently than a contractor driving into an affluent one. Same job, same materials. Different number on the estimate. Warren Buffett and I keep coming back to this guy because his entire life is a masterclass in invisible wealth. Once said he never worried about being overcharged because nobody knew he was wealthy. His modest appearance was a permanent negotiating advantage. Over a lifetime of purchases, houses, cars, repairs, renovations, services, the pricing differential between someone who looks wealthy and someone who looks ordinary adds up to tens of thousands of dollars, maybe hundreds of thousands. You're paying a luxury tax on everything you buy when you look rich, not a government tax, a social tax, a perception tax, and it's completely voluntary. Pause. Now I want to be careful here, because every time someone talks about stealth wealth or looking poor on purpose, there's a version of this argument that tips into something unhealthy, into deprivation masquerading as strategy, into cheapness pretending to be wisdom. That's not what Glen is doing, and that's not what I'm talking about. Glen doesn't deprive himself. He travels. He eats well. He spends money on things that genuinely matter to him, his family, his health, his community work. He just doesn't spend money on things that only matter to other people. That distinction between spending that serves your actual life and spending that serves your perceived life, that's the whole game. That's the only thing that separates Glen from Derek. It's not discipline, it's not sacrifice. It's clarity about who the spending is actually for. Pause. Let me give you the math. Because I think it makes the abstract concrete. Someone earning $200,000 a year who saves 25%, $50,000 a year, and invested at 7% average returns for 25 years ends up with approximately $3.4 million. Someone earning the same $200,000 who saves 5%, $10,000 a year with the other 20%, going to visible consumption, ends up with about $680,000 over the same period. Same income, same timeline, same market returns. One person looks middle class. The other looks wealthy. The middle class looking person has 5 times the net worth. Pause. 5 times. That's not a rounding error. That's the difference between retiring at 53 and working until 70. Between sleeping without dread and lying awake doing math at midnight. Between having options everywhere and having obligations everywhere. And the only thing that created the gap was a decision about who the money was for. Was it for your life, or was it for other people's perception of your life? Pause. I want to tell you one more thing about Glen, because it's the detail that keeps pulling me back to his story. About a year ago, one of his old coworkers, someone who'd worked at the same firm, similar salary, knew Glen when he was still in the workforce. This coworker ran into Glen at a grocery store. They caught up. The coworker mentioned he was still working, 61 years old, would love to retire but couldn't afford to. And then the coworker said something that Glen repeated to me word for word, because it had clearly stayed with him. The coworker said, "You were smart to live small, Glen. I wish I'd done what you did, but I just couldn't. I couldn't let people think I wasn't doing well." Pause. I couldn't let people think I wasn't doing well. Softer. That sentence is the entire American financial crisis in 14 words. Not, "I wanted nice things." Not, "I valued experiences." Not, "I chose a different path." I couldn't let people think I wasn't doing well. The spending wasn't for himself. It was for the audience. And the audience didn't care. The audience was busy spending their own money on their own performance for their own audience, who also didn't care. An entire economy built on impressing people who aren't paying attention with money that could have been freedom. Pause. Here's where I want to land. I'm not Glen, not yet. I'm closer than I was 5 years ago, but I'm still unlearning the programming. I still feel the pull when I see someone driving something impressive. I still catch myself calculating what other people think of my car, my clothes, my apartment. The programming runs deep. It started when I was a kid watching TV shows where rich people lived in big houses and poor people were the punchline. It was reinforced every time I walked into a meeting and scanned the room for watches and shoes and all the other tiny signals we use to sort each other into categories. And it takes a long time to overwrite. Maybe you never fully override it. Maybe you just get better at noticing when it's running and choosing not to follow the instruction. Pause. But I'll tell you this. Every morning I pull into that gym parking lot, I look for Glen Civic. The faded paint, the dent on the passenger side, and I feel something that's hard to describe, a mix of respect and relief. Respect, because he figured out something most people never figure out. And relief, because if he can do it, a regular guy, an engineer, not a genius, not a monk, just someone who decided that other people's opinions weren't worth $4.2 million, then maybe I can too. Pause. Let me leave you with the question that Glen asked me at that coffee counter, the one that started all of this. He said, "Marcus, who are you getting dressed for in the morning?" Pause. I didn't have a good answer. Softer. I still don't, some mornings. But I'm getting closer. Pause. The man with $4.2 million wears a $30 watch and drives a car with a dent he'll never fix. The man with $140,000 wears a watch that costs more than most people's rent and drives a car he doesn't own. One of them is free. Slower. The other one just looks like it. Pause. And somewhere in your city right now, there's a parking lot where the richest person there drove the worst car. And nobody knows. And that's exactly the point. Whispers. Wealth isn't what you show, it's what you keep. Pause. If this one rearranged something in your head the way Glen rearranged something in mine, share it with someone who needs to hear it, not the person who's already frugal. The person who's exhausted from performing a lifestyle they can't actually afford. They don't need another lecture about saving money. They need permission to stop pretending. Pause. Next one's coming. We're just getting started.